Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call this meeting of the Board of Aldermen to order. If you would stand and recite the pledge with me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Alderman Dorhoff.
Present.
Alderman Miller.
Present.
Alderman Turner.
Present.
Alderman Milner.
Present.
Alderman Davidson.
Present.
Alderman Reese.
Present.
Alderman Dickerson.
Here.
Alderman Balkelman is absent. And Mayor Bowman.
Present. We do have a quorum, and we have some celebratory matters, so we're going to go ahead and get started with that. I think we start with Mike Hyatt. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
How are you? Good. How are you? It's good to see you. Is this your whole crew?
Yep.
Okay. Good to see you. So Mike Hyatt has been with the fire department now for 10 years. What kind of changes have you seen in the fire department in these 10 years?
Quite a bit.
Yeah?
The chief, advancements, and newer ambulances, newer fire trucks, stuff like that. So good.
What would you like to say about this man?
I know Mike since he's been really small running around.
Are you that old?
Yeah, I am. And I've seen him grow up through the organization, started as a junior and worked his way all the way up to where he's at right now.
So is this a lifelong dream of yours to be a firefighter?
For quite a while, yeah.
Well, congratulations. We're really honored to have you part of our team. I have a presentation here for you for grateful appreciation on behalf of the city and the aldermen for your 10 years. We hope you'll be with us much longer. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'll let you present that to him, and we'll do a picture.
Get all three of you in there. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Congratulations.
Excellent.
Aren't you recently married too?
October 5th.
Oh.
That's why I didn't make the 7th.
I wonder why.
All right, I have another award to present. This to Eric Patterson. Come on up here, our Public Works Director. This is for 15 years. And so what kind of changes have you seen in the Public Works Department in the last
Let's see, a couple of city administrators, some of them coming back more than once or twice. Seen a lot of good projects started,
Good employees.
a lot of good employees. It's amazing the longevity of a lot of our employees, which I think is a real asset to the city. So at 15 years, a year ago, I was low man on the totem pole.
You received a nice promotion, worthwhile promotion. You studied under Jerry Gibbs. You had a great mentor, great teacher. So thank you for 15 years.
Thank
We
you.
hope you'll be with us for a whole lot
I hope so
longer.
too.
Alright. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Way to go, Eric.
Thank you.
Is there anybody who's going to receive the small business Saturday? Okay, I'm going to hold on to that then, because that's embarrassing. Okay, this proclamation is buckle up, phone down. I'm going to invite George and Grace. Oh, good, we have somebody else coming. Logan, hi. These young adults are members of this group called Traction. I think you probably remember they were here a few weeks ago and we honored them. So this is about, Jeremiah, come on in here. Let the chief take the picture for you. You know, there's a promotion from MoDOT about wearing seatbelts and putting down cell phones and avoiding texting. And these young people are behind this effort. It's called Buckle Up, Phone Down, and it's a program of MoDOT, and it's just to keep people safe. And I wanted to acknowledge these young people again for their work with their peers to make sure that peers drive safely that they're not distracted. You know, distracted driving is one of the big reasons for crashes and injuries and deaths. So do you have something you want to say, George?
Yes, I just wanted to thank the board for all your help with all of our programs and making this community safer, and that I hope that maybe in the future we can work towards a primary ordinance for cell phones in our area so that people can be pulled over at any age for being on their phones while driving. Because as was stated before, distracted driving is a main cause of car crashes, and that kills hundreds of people a year, and it's just devastating. So I think working on this is very important. Thank you all very much.
So here's the proclamation. Whereas in 2018, 921 people were killed in Missouri traffic crashes. 685 were vehicle drivers and passengers, with 63% being unbuckled. Whereas 94% of crashes are caused by some form of human error. Whereas cell phone related crashes in Missouri have increased 31% since 2014. Whereas right now, Missouri has a no texting law for drivers aged 21 years and under. But distracted driving isn't just a young driver problem. In the last 3 years, approximately 70% of cell phone related crashes in Missouri involve drivers aged 22 or older. We are challenging all drivers to honor that no ban, no matter what their age. Whereas when a driver is texting and driving, they are 23 times more likely to be in a critical incident. Whereas more than 10,000 individuals and 461 organizations have taken the pledge to always buckle up and put their phone down while driving. Now therefore, I, Judy Bowman, Mayor of Harrisonville, Missouri, do hereby proclaim October 29th, 2019 as Buckle Up Phone Down Day, and urge the residents of our community to take the challenge to always buckle up and phone down while driving. Congratulations again. Officer Jacobs, do you have something you want to say about these young people?
Yeah, we've got quite a few more people in there, but they're working tonight and have some soccer games and stuff. So luckily these few came out here tonight. And again, just thank you guys for all you do. Chief is very supportive of the group, shows up to the meetings and helps us out with the group. So thank you, Mayor.
You're welcome. Chief, why don't you come up here and get in the picture?
Because you told me to take the picture.
I got you for that.
You've been overruled again. So for the paper, it's Logan, George, and Grace.
You get that, Dennis?
Do they have last names?
Nope.
Winley, Kirkland, Freeze. Good luck, Colin.
All right, everybody, gonna snap a couple of pictures. 3, 2, 1. Apparently we gotta take this one too, so sit tight. Yeah. Chief, open that back up.
Just tell us the password.
All right. Round 2, 3, 2, 1. There we go. Thank you.
And don't move.
Not moving.
This dam is not transparent. Okay.
Congratulations again. And then finally, it's a proclamation about Small Business Saturday for 2019. Whereas the government of Harrisonville, Missouri celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions that they make to our local economy and community, according to the United States Small Business Administration, there are currently 30.2 million small businesses in the United States. They represent 99.7% of all businesses with employees in the United States, and they're responsible for 65.9% of net new jobs created from 2000 to 2017. And whereas small business employs 47.5% of the employees in the private sector in the United States, and 94% of consumers in the United States value the contributions small business make in their community, And whereas 96% of consumers who plan to shop on Small Business Saturday said the day inspires them to go to small, independently owned retailers or restaurants that they have not been to before or would not have otherwise tried. And whereas 92% of companies planning promotions on Small Business Saturday said the day helps their business stand out during the busy holiday shopping season. And whereas 59% of small business owners said Small Business Saturday contributes significantly to their holiday sales each year. And whereas Harrisonville, Missouri supports our local businesses, that creates jobs, boosts our local economy, and preserve our communities. And whereas advocacy groups, as well as public and private organizations across the country, have endorsed this Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday. Now, therefore, I, Judy Bowman, Mayor of Harrisonville, Missouri, do hereby proclaim November 30th, 2019 as Small Business Saturday and urge the residents of our community and communities across the country to support small business and merchants on Small Business Saturday and throughout the year. I saw on Facebook that Brick House is having a Small Business Saturday event at 8 o'clock in the morning of November 30th. I think they're going to gather and people are going to have coffee and they're going to give out coupons and shopping bags and just encourage people to shop on the square. So you might want to stick that into your calendar if you don't already have it for November 30th. All right, I think I'm done. Okay. So moving on to public participation, is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the Board of Aldermen? If so, please step forward to the podium. And please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Tammy Caldwell. So as you probably know or recognize me, I live on Walker Drive. And I guess my question is to the board. Last week, MoDOT did come out and touch 2 of the culverts. And so very, very quickly, you all made sure to put on Facebook and on your personal mayor Facebook page, you know, that you were working with these entities to get this done quickly. My question is have any of you personally went out to see the work that has been done? You have. So.
MoDOT's not done.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so my question would be then, my next question is what's the follow-up? Because what they did was nothing. And if you all think that they've really done anything, I know your pictures and all the publicity states that, boy, they've done a lot. I personally watched them take 5 truckloads of dirt from the corner of Joy and Commercial. And they might have taken a couple more, but they also tore down some of the trees. They left a ton of debris. They did make sure to plant grass seed. But then on the culvert next to I-49, the one that always jams up, actually they removed dirt from one spot and then put it over to another spot, and they rolled over it with their backhoe and then put grass seed down. And then the next day they came out and put plastic barrier along with, I wouldn't say 2x4s, but wood to, I guess, catch the rain and the runoff. I have yet to go out there today to see what it looks like afterwards. So when that runs off like it did 2 years ago, it's going to jam up the creek. So I'm not sure what the fix is here. I know last time we talked, you guys had said that you guys were going to talk with MoDOT. I know that Donna Felch came down and Eric, is that right?
Yep.
I saw them both down there talking with MoDOT the second day that they came out. I know that we're going to talk about kind of a solution here or a emergency alert system, but have you guys talked any more about it since our last meeting? Like, what is the plan here? Because what they did was really just smoke and mirrors. It really was a waste of those people's time to come out and do what they did. Because I personally walked the culverts underneath Joy, and Commercial. And the one will never flow right by the way that it's even on the other side. So what is the plan? What is the plan? I guess that's my question.
So I'm happy to meet with you at some time and kind of give you an update, if you'd like, on where we're at right now. Can
Okay.
we do that sometime?
Yep,
Okay.
yep, great, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hannah Murphy, and what else was I supposed to
Your
say?
address.
Address, 105 East Walker. So I was just, had a, kind of a statement on what they're gonna speak tonight, and I don't know if you guys remember, but we had kind of come in April or something around there and talked about an alert system. Well, it just so happened that Paul, and I am sorry, it's Paul, yes, okay, is presenting a system, kind of like what we had seen in that one town. And everyone's like, well, how is that really gonna benefit us? Like we said, we had 6 minutes from the water rising to get to our house, and at night, people don't know. So I just encourage you guys, if you feel this is a good system, or if you think, I mean, I'm not knocking your system, but if you think there's another system out there, this is really what we are looking for a warning system for us. So we would please look into this system or another system. I haven't got to hear, the full details, that's kind of why we come tonight, but this is exactly on the lines. It can go around different areas that aren't actually flood zones, but can just alert us when that water rises ahead of time, so we know. And, because every time we live our life, when it rains, we prepare 4 foot up at minimum. We start putting our stuff up, that's the way we live. That would at least give us a little bit longer than 6 minutes, so I just encourage you guys, please, to look into a system like this, because this, for one, can save lives. I just feel like as quick as that water is surrounding us, it's gonna take someone's life. I know it. So, and I hate to see that. So, that's all.
Thank you, and I would echo our appreciation for the USGS being here this evening, and we look forward to hearing what Paul has to share with us. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board this evening? Seeing no one, I'll close public participation, and I would ask you at this point to please put your cell phones on mute. And we'll move to the approval of minutes. First, we have the minutes of the Board of Aldermen work session from October 7th, 2019.
Second.
I have a motion from Alderman Milner with a second from Alderman Davidson to approve those minutes of the work session. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, those minutes stand approved. And moving on to the minutes of the Board of Aldermen regular meeting for October 7th.
Move to approve. Second.
Thank you, I have a motion from Alderman Turner with a second from Alderman Dorhoff to approve those minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. Those minutes stand approved. The minutes of the executive session, October 7th, 2019.
I move to approve with, I think, the one change that I had suggested to Steve.
And I can make,
Counselor.
that's no problem.
Second.
Do you want to explain what that change would be?
The change is that the take-home vehicle will be unavailable, not available.
All right, so with that one change then, a motion to approve the executive session minutes?
Move to approve with change.
Alderman Davidson makes the motion, Alderman Milner makes the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. Those executive session minutes stand approved. Moving on to the agenda items, our guest from the USGS. Who's introducing him? Eric, please. Thank you.
Along with the Army Corps of Engineers, we've also been talking with Mr. Redland from U.S. Geological Survey. And he is going to talk a little bit about what they do and some options he has on, like Mrs. Murphy said, an alert system. It's not the only one, but it is a good one, and it at least gives us a point to start from and go from there. At this point, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Excellent. We want to thank you for coming tonight, and we also want to thank you for being present at the last meeting where you were there to answer questions that some of our residents raised. So we want to thank you for your participation and your help. We love having your agency involved.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Bowman, and the Board of Aldermen and the citizens for having me here today. It's not a very big screen, and I'm probably going to stand in the wrong spot for people not to see over me, but hopefully I'll try to move back and forth. One of the big takeaways that we try to address, when people think of the USGS, they think, no, that's the agency that deals with earthquakes. And actually we are, but the biggest thing we deal with is water, and when it talks about the mission and aligning to the protection of life and property, that's probably one of the biggest things that our agency does. So what I thought I would do is kind of go through the flood warning system and the mapping that goes along with that to give it a little bit of utility, and hopefully try to share this with some of the folks in the room just as a potential action item, something that's got some tangibility that I think that we can look at and say, hey, that's actually something we can work with. And I know the screen's a little small here, but I'll do the best I can to get through these, and I have quite a few slides, so I'll go through them to make sure the time's not too long. The first thing that we want to address is the fact that we have to have data collection. Because if we don't have data out there, then we're really just throwing up a lot of models and things like that that are good, but they're only good if we have data to be able to go and put into it. So if people understand a little bit about the USGS, we've got 280 gauges throughout the state of Missouri. And the stream gauges in and of themselves, one of the biggest things they do is for that very reason, the protection of life and property. So when we take a look at Town Creek Basin or Muddy Creek Basin and some of the impacts that have happened in 2019, 2017, and some other floods I probably am not aware of at this point, we take a look at where are the opportunities for data collection and being able to put gauges in there. And there's two types of gauges we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about precipitation gauges, which I want to make sure it's really clear that these, and I kind of was teasing when I was talking to Eric, these are not the gauges we go to Walmart and buy off the shelf. Okay, this isn't a plastic thing or something like that we can talk about how many inches of rain we got. These are telemeter gauges. They are gauges that we use actually in the flood warning system. In addition to precipitation gauges, we have stream flow gauges, and they're out there as well. And there's going to be some discussion as to what we do with the stream flow gauges. But on the face of it, I think some of us in the room would say, well, Paul, if you're going to put a stream flow gauge on Muddy Creek or Town Creek or something like that, by the time it's already going up, the water's already there, right? But precipitation gauges give us that little benefit in terms of the time we need to be able to react, and that's where we're going to go with this. So if we take a look at the two basins, and I know it's a little hard to see here, we've got some ideas on where we'd be potentially putting a precipitation gauge or a stream gauge. We're not exact right now because we're in the initial scoping of where this would go. This is Town Creek Basin, this is Muddy Creek Basin, and just, we have to start with those two. We have to figure out how we're going to, where we're going to place those, and we have to make sure they're optimal, okay? Because there's a lot of information that's going to come from it. And what you're going to see today is it's not just, oh, well, the gauge is put in my backyard, so I can tell you exactly what's going on in my backyard, because that wouldn't be very useful. We're going to actually go ahead and extend that out and do some mapping throughout the entire reach of the creek there that's affected, or the river that's affected for people's property, and giving them impacts so we can get some more utility out of it. So a couple things I want to mention real quick. Water now is an interesting utility that's out there for a gauge that's wherever the gauge might be. There's Grand River at Archie, I think, is a gauge that's, is it south of here? There's gauges up in Lee Summit that we have and around the Kansas City area. We can go ahead and type in basically what that gauge is, and it'll provide the information back on the fly as to what the stream flow is, what's the river level of it. That's water now. This one is what we're really going to be interested in right here. This is called Water Alert. So this does the guesswork out of it. It's going to go ahead and allow us to, or allow this utility right here to send us a text message or an email. Most people like a text message. Given that we put a threshold in and say, well, that precipitation gauge is registering this much accumulation over this duration, whether it's 1 hour, or I don't know, 30 minutes or 2 hours, whatever the case may be. So the Water Alert is what we're going to really focus on, and essentially it's a subscription form that we all sign up for with any one of our gauges, whatever the gauge may be. This is available. And what we're going to dial in on, and I know this is hard to see, but that precipitation parameters there, whether it's 1 hour, 2, 4, 6, 12, 24 hours, we're going to start to break that apart. We're going to start to choose those different durations to which we want notifications, and we can choose several of them. Because we just say, well, I can only choose one, so, well, what good does that do? Because I think we're going to want certain levels of defense in terms of when that rain is starting to hit the ground, and how does that translate, those rainfalls? What does that mean to us? And this is what we're going to talk about. So, Eric was mentioning with Corps of Engineers, and I was here sitting in the back and listening to the discussions that were going on. They are doing some legwork here. So this is an opportunity for the USGS to go ahead and build upon that, right? Because it's a collaborative thing. So if the Corps of Engineers is doing some legwork, we should leverage that because it makes it something that is cost prohibitive, A, and B, I mean, it's two good tools that we can combine now and start to make something of it that makes sense. So I call it this big fancy term called preemptive decision support. It's consequence-based flood scenarios. How are we going to address that? The first thing in step one is we got to deal with gauges, precipitation and stream flow. Step two is we're going to take this modeling, and you can see the Corps' logo right above ours because they're already doing that. So we're going to use the models that they've created. We're going to take them. We're going to do some adjusting to those and some calibration because those models aren't any good if we don't calibrate them. So that's step two. Step three is we're going to go to the mapping aspect of that because maps tell us something. They actually give us information that I think we can use. Once again, the Corps is doing the mapping. They have the modeling that's out there and we'll be building that, and they already have to do the mapping. So we're going to take that. We're going to be calibrating those for the use that we would do in this particular scenario. And then step four is getting it out there for people that can actually use it. And not only just at a desktop computer, but on a phone, to be able to go ahead and say, oh, okay, well, we're looking at this much rainfall, and we have several different notifications that are coming in. Now I want to be able to go ahead and identify where that impact's going to be, where that water's going to be, and what the depth of that water's going to be. And I think this is what we're going to talk about and show everybody here today. So this is a little hard to read, but what we have up there is a table. And on the column to the left is the duration, 1 hour, 2, 4, 6, whatever the case may be. And then on the column to the right is the incremental magnitude of rainfall, or the inches that accumulate, right? Sometimes they call it intensities. So when we look at that, in this particular case, we got a 2-hour duration with 4 inches of rain. It's just an example. That's all it is an example. But to give this meaning, we want to translate that table, all right, that we set up in Water Alert that gives us a text message to a map. Something that now just tells us information, not just at the gauge, but upstream and downstream of the gauge, through the bridges and things of that nature. And that's what this utility does. So if we look over there on the screen, the Flood Inundation Mapper is a USGS product that you can scroll anywhere in the blue space. The blue space is going to be basically a reflection of what that current rainfall selection is. Okay? What is that duration and incremental magnitude or accumulation? It's going to translate that to an inundation layer or a map, and then you can click anywhere within that layer and you're going to find out the water depth. Okay? So that water depth is dynamic. I mean, we get towards the channel, it's going to be deeper, obviously. But that's part of the system. So what we're doing here is we are taking, now I know I'm going to block everybody's view, we are taking this 2-hour duration, 4 inches of rain, we're translating it to a nice little slider bar, okay, that's going to allow us to go ahead and say, oh, okay, that means this, and it's going to put that inundation extent out there to be able to identify that. So all of that will be put up into a utility for use. The reason we are focused on precipitation is because we put a gauge in there, a stream flow gauge, or a stage gauge, either way. We're going to put it in there for a different reason. And I'll explain that in a minute. But the precipitation gauge is necessary because when the rain starts to come, we have time to react. When the river's already coming up, I mean, how much time do we have? Not a whole lot. So I think that's why we're going to build on this. Another example, by the way, our neighbors up to the north with Dennis Randolph and the city of Grandview, we're already doing this for them. So I think Eric's going to probably talk with them. But this is a city already, I don't know, but the flood watch is preparation issued when conditions are favorable for a hazard weather event. I think a lot of us understand more of a tornado watch. Flood watch, kind of the same. Okay, perspective. And then the flood advisory. It may become a nuisance, but potentially it could be something more. Now, this allows us more time from those two statements. Now, that just comes from the National Weather Service. Whether it comes through a code red or some other system, these are really the first line of defense and the notifications out there as to what do they mean. All right? But if we want to get down to the second line of defense, the actual part that the USGS would be involved in and their system, it's right here. It's this USGS precipitation-based mapping warning system that gives us about 2+ hours. I wish I could say it gives you 3 days, but if you're looking for days, we're going to be looking at long-term forecasts, and we're going to be looking at flood watch and flood advisory to really sink in notifications that give us a much further perspective. But for 2 hours, essentially rain to a peak flow, that's when rain starts to hit, and we get those peaks, and all the fancy little tables and things you guys see on there are studies that we've taken all throughout the state of Missouri and urban basins, even smaller than Muddy Creek and Town Creek, and looking at the response time with different types of rainfall and durations. All right, so this is what we're basing this off of. This system right here is really our second line of defense. If you ever look at a flash flood warning, which many of you maybe have a lot of information, I'm sure a lot of comments about, again, I'm not the expert, typically what that means by the National Weather Service, it's imminent, and typically it's already occurring. And they say flash flood. So that's not going to give you 2 hours typically, especially a small basin. It's going to be much less. I put less than an hour, it could be minutes. It could be happening right there. So when we're starting to look at these other defense mechanisms, you're really getting it down to the point that the flood warning that we get from the National Weather Service basically means it's already happening. So we need time. And then I was talking with Eric, the code red weather alert, there's other systems that are out there. That's something the city usually works with. Some of the emergency personnel here know more about that than myself or the EM directors of Cass County or whatnot. Two-way messaging, social media capabilities, and real-time reporting, those are usually inherent in the code red system to get out information. Where we're at, again, is number 3. We're the flood warning system. And I'm going to demonstrate the mapping here. The other thing we have is a stream flow gauge, okay? A gauge that measures stage, and with a bunch of measurements, we can actually have flow, and that information gets disseminated out to the public. This gauge is over here in Grandview. The reason we would use a gauge like that, and only the reason we would probably use it over here in Harrisonville, is to validate those models, okay? Precipitation is going to drive, they're going to be the inputs to these models to get out these maps that everybody can use on their phone or whatever the case may be. But we need to put in some sort of gauge to keep those models relevant. Okay, if we don't do that, then I think we're missing out on some data collection. Okay? So essentially that's the takeaway on this slide, is that if we put a gauge in there that measures stage and flow, not just precip, but another gauge that measures stage and flow, and we're doing a service there by keeping up with those models and making sure that we are getting a good, accurate calibration per event that come through there each time. Now, some of these gauges are a little cost prohibitive. I'll just be honest, they're cost prohibitive to a lot of communities. So I was sharing with Eric in there's a hybrid we can take. If this information doesn't need to be out there to the public and we can get by with fewer measurements, at least the measurements up at the upper end, because that's all we're interested in, right, is the flooding. We can do these special type of installations. They're what they're called a hybrid crest gauge gauge with these submersible sensors. I won't get into all the technical stuff. We can get the cost down, so I think we've got some alternatives there that are more economical. Again, precip is what we want. We're not going to cut costs on those, but for this type of thing, we need to validate those models. Future integration is another thing real quick I want to mention. Where we're headed, I'd probably say anywhere from about 6 to 10 years, is we're going to be integrated into the National Weather Service's what they call flood national water model. What you see out here is actually the tree. I know you can't see that, but the tributary of Muddy Creek, it shows a forecast for that tributary. And somebody that knows a little something about hydrology would say, how the heck are they doing that? There's no gauge out there, and I would say exactly. But the more communities that start having gauge information and data collection, this model, once it's up and running, will be used throughout the whole country. That's why they call it the National Water Model. You're going to have some good verification there, and you're going to minimize those uncertainties. So this will be future integration in terms of the data that we use in a flood warning system, let's say for Harrisonville, which some of that would get ingested into the National Weather Service when we improve their forecasts. Okay, so that would all be tied in as well. All right, so if we go to just the basic, what does this look like? I'm gonna go ahead and steal something from Joachim Creek in the city of DeSoto. Okay, we've done this a while back. This is the utility. Essentially, the little blue line that we see throughout there is Joachim Creek. There's a slider bar. I know that's hard to read, and the laser pointer doesn't work on a TV very well, but essentially what we're doing is we're looking at the first action stage there. You can click anywhere in that action stage. Of course, it's pretty much just confined to the creek. But if we go up, and there's our slider bar that we get to use. Now again, that's going to be correlated to precip, okay, for a system like this. But if we move forward, we can say, okay, well, if we're at 10 feet at Joachim Creek, what does that blue space look like? We can zoom in, take a look, scroll around, click anywhere in there, find out what that depth's going to be. Not just at the gauge, but 5 miles, 10 miles upstream, however far we model. If we go ahead and say, well, we want to go ahead and use the base layer and take that for satellite imagery, that's a lot more easy for some folks, and zoom in a little closer. We got that information. Again, that's 10 feet. Let's take it up to 12 feet. Now we can dial in and say, well, here's Rollins Street, the impact of 1/2 foot to 1.5 feet of depth for a particular stage of 12 feet. You'd say, well, what do I care about 12 feet? Well, 12 feet may be that indication you get in that flood warning system. Or some other things that Eric and I were talking about is that it could just be, use it for a planning tool. Okay, what events have we had in 2019 and 2017? We've got the data out there, some people already know it. And if not, you can look it up and find out what type of rainfall fell in, what kind of intensities happened and over what duration. You can pull those maps up, see what the impacts were, and you can use it as a planning tool to mitigate risk. Okay, so it doesn't just have to be, we have to only use this when it's happening, we use it preemptively, once the maps are set up. So going up to 12 feet, we can see there's a DeWitt Street impact, 0 to 1 foot. I can just circle through these, and you can click anywhere in this, and you can continue. This is Veterans Drive. This is major stage of 13 feet, and this is Walter Park. You can see I just put a different type of map or background in there, and these folks use this. Okay, and they've had plenty of floods. This is actually a really big flood of 16 feet, and it's, believe it or not, there in DeSoto, it impacts their main street. So they're very concerned about their commerce and business that they have going on right now, and they've got a lot of FEMA work that we're also assisting with there as well. So there's just a few things in trying to get through this, and I'm getting ready to conclude here, but the top 10 annual flood peaks and documentation, very important. With what our agency does is that it puts out these publications, and I know that can be boring, but by the same token, it's also something that holds up in a court of law, and people use it all the time. They reference it, okay? So when we do anything out here, we got to put out a publication. Top 10 annual flood peaks. I call that the flood amnesia slide, right? So we know where we've been in the past. Now, obviously, it takes a while. We put a gauge in. We're always going to be recording all this information. You can see the top 10 peaks. That's if we have a flow gauge. Or you're going to get the annual peaks there. You can see all the little black lines. And if these colors mean anything to anybody, these are the National Weather Service colors, right? We have the action stage, we have the minor, moderate, and the purple's like the God forbid, major stage. We don't want that. Okay? And then the reports down there, it's kind of hard to see, but this is a publication. Again, this is what we use to deal with different issues, unfortunately, if you have legal issues or whatever the case may be. I was also mentioning a couple quick things that we do put webcams in. The webcams, a lot of people use them. The highway department's got a bunch of them throughout. We use them in terms of water. So we're putting them on gauges. We're just attaching to these gauges. Now, it's a value-added piece. Doesn't necessarily come with the cost of the gauge. It's something we have to talk through, but nonetheless, they're kind of useful, and some people might find some benefit in there. There's just more examples. This one down on the lower right-hand side, it's over the Missouri River, if anybody's been to Herman before. So, that's not uncommon for us to do that. The other thing on this tool that's kind of handy is we can enter in an address. You can enter in an address, it'll bring you right to that address, show you the impact at whatever stage you choose to pick, whether you do it on your phone or whether you do it at your desktop. That here is 811 DeWitt Street, DeSoto, 1 to 2 foot impact. I've entered that right up in the upper hand right. This one over is Arnold. It's on a different river. And again, I entered the address. It'll bring you right there. That's kind of helpful for people to find out where that is. So, real quick, just to conclude, the where and why for the subscription. Remember, it's all about Water Alert. Water Alert sends you a text message or an email. You subscribe, you have different iterations to that. USGS Water Alert. This one's Joachim Creek and DeSoto. I subscribe to Water Alert. I can go in and enter the stream gauge information, whether it's a stream gauge or precipitation gauge, my cell phone, notification limits, and any kind of thresholds I want to put in there. Okay? Then the work is done. It can just text you when those things occur. It'll give you, on the water alert form, it gives you a peak chart that identifies what kind of flow has occurred there or what kind of stages have occurred. And you guys are all saying, well, there's only one. And I say, yeah, because the gauge has only been there 1 year. But over time, you're going to see that perspective. Now, also on the subscription form on Water Alert, you're going to do it on, and you're going to click on this flood inundation map. And this is going to be the big map where we're going to dial into those little triangles that get us out to that nice blue area we can click on and slider bar and, you know, figure out what, you know, how deep things are around different properties. So Water Alert's easily accessible from that tool. One additional thing, this is a different river system entirely, but the application is still real. We can put two adjoining rivers that come in. So if Town Creek and Muddy Creek come in and it's evidence that one creek causes the other to back up and that water profile is a little different, then we can put two slider bars in there in that tool and allow people to be able to use that. Okay? This is a way different example, right? Because it's the Merrimack and Mississippi. Just a little bit bigger than these rivers. But still, the application is still the same. One other thing is a loss estimate application. For some of the folks that have dealt with FEMA and some of the things that are out there, this provides a census block accounting of vehicle losses, building losses, these potentials for what are we looking at monetarily if these floods get to be, or if these inundation layers that are all vetted through this inundation mapper, if they all, you know, they get to be certain stages, it takes all that into account to identify what those potential losses can be. This is called HAZIS. It's not uncommon, and it's used throughout FEMA's, a lot of the regulatory world. So, all right, just to end, the benefits of the mapping, EMA director can focus on warnings, evacuation routes, traffic barricades, decision-making. Officials have answers quickly, better educated for floods. And one last thing, if the community is, and it sounds like you all are, I guess adopting the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, any tool like this, actually what it does, ultimately it helps build the community rating system. Okay, under a 600 series, flood warning and response, this is credit. And so if we're familiar with this at all, it's got 10 different layers, 10 different steps to it. I won't go into details, but what it does is it reduces insurance premiums. So it's one little additive thing to say the city's being proactive and trying to do something in terms of flooding. And so it just kind of, what it does is it adds additional points for the community rating system to go ahead and provide a larger discount in flood insurance premiums for those communities that have adopted the National Flood Insurance Program. So, try to go through that quickly, but that's the gist of it. Hopefully I didn't go over everybody's head, but I didn't want to put people to sleep either. So, any questions?
I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
You indicated the warning system 2+ hours, right?
Yeah.
Okay. 17 probably, I can understand.
Sure.
This most recent one in 19 was over in 2 hours.
Yep.
So how, and I know you talk about the weather service and all that, so explain how it's gonna give the residents a 2+ hours warning system when the rain hasn't even started yet.
Okay, so what we're trying to do is get an idea. So when you say it's over in 2 hours, right? So the rain hit, and then the floods hit. The rain didn't even start, right? So in other words, if we have time 0 here, just so everybody can help me out. At time 0, the rain started, in 2 hours, it flooded everybody and it was completely over.
Pretty close.
30 minutes.
No, I mean from the time the rain absolutely started hitting the ground.
From the time the rain,
Okay.
well, I think within an hour and a half, I think different reports between 5 and 6 inches of rain in just an hour and a half.
Sure.
So, I mean, it was over by the time the 2 hours would be up. That's what I'm trying to.
What we see, and so we go back to look at, depends upon what duration we're looking at, 30-minute durations, 1 hour durations. We can dial that down and make selections on things that are going to be a bit more responsive than that 2 hour. But generally speaking, in a lot of these basins, we see by the time the rain starts to the time the flood hits its peak, I mean does all its damage, there's about a 2 hour, by the time it starts, not rain's been on the ground cooking for a little bit, right? Then that's generally what we see in a lot of these urban basins. That doesn't mean it's always the case. And for protection, what we want to do is we want to dial in those durations to take it down to a smaller interval. You know, that's what I would do. I would say we're going to do a 30-minute or maybe a 1 hour, and then we're going to go ahead and start looking at different accumulations just because we can get that very fast, hard rainfall. But the truth of the matter is 100-year, we've heard 100-year events, we've heard 500-year events. A 500-year event in terms of rainfall for an area like this is about 10 inches in 24 hours. That's a 500-year event. So that's Atlas 14, that's Bolton 17B, blah, 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 and all this other stuff. So there's some designs that really get put into this that probably need to be adjusted. And right now what we see, unfortunately, when our agency's got to talk about this all the time, is climate change in terms of what kind of rainfalls are we seeing these days as compared to what we've seen in the past. We would make adjustments to try to account for that. But,
Well, I think probably the forecast, and I think that day, the forecast was, we were already getting warnings from the, at least I was, from the Weather Service.
Sure.
And you could watch the map and see the colors, the different colors on that map, just not knowing exactly where it was gonna hit and how it was gonna affect us. I think was the main thing.
Right. What we try to do with the gauges is we're trying to spatially put them in a location that if it's gonna go ahead and hit within that watershed, okay, we're trying to put that precip gauge in there, kind of the centroid or the central part of that watershed to capture that. Now, the watershed's not that big. I mean, you know, big to you and I mean, we have to walk around the thing, but in terms of how we see storm events come through, you know, that's essentially what we're using is the gauge to be able to provide as an indication for that watershed. Now, it also looks at the Doppler and seeing that big blob of, hopefully not purple, but sometimes it's purple, come on in there. So we gotta look at that as well. So those are also factored into that system. But, yes.
But back to your original question, the 2 hours, that's in the settings that each individual would put in, like, and we'll know what happens at 2 inches in an hour. I'll just use that as an example. That you set that as one of your parameters. Well, when that 2 inches hit in less than an hour, that's automatically going to give you alert because it hit at least the 2 inch threshold in a time frame. So you won't get the full 2 hours on a 2 hour event, but maybe that's an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that answered my question. I was just curious because you mentioned that, and I think, thanks, Eric, I think that helps. And
Yeah.
I think it was important that, I can't say that I've seen rain like this.
That's
in
actually
2019.
That's actually pretty. We can go back and pull all the they call it NextRat data. We can go pull all that data and look at it, and we will because we have to calibrate those models. We will resurrect what happened, and you know, considering I'm an old surveyor, we'll be boots on the ground anyway, talking to people, you know, and asking about just from what I've already heard. But certainly, you know, discussing with folks as to what occurred and how high things got because you'll have to do that. But yes, Eric's right. We'll have to kind of dial that back to 30 minutes or you use those first line of defenses before you get there, you know, so you're not missing anything. Yeah, that's right.
Good, thank you.
Have you figured out which way the flood came from? Did it come from runoff from above stream, or was it because it backed up because it was running down the highway and off of the truck stops and all those hard surfaces out there, draining in there faster? And it's my understanding that's what happened. It backed up. It couldn't run off, and it backed up into the trade fair and those other things. And so is this warning system going to be able to gauge how much water's coming off that highway? Because I think that's the biggest problem, is because that's where it all drains, right down there and off of the truck stop.
Very good point. A couple things. To go through and look at every detail of what happened on these floods, and absolutely we will look at all of that before we even put pen to paper on these models and start tweaking them. That's why I say the Corps they set up the models, they build them, it's like building a house. Well, we're going to go ahead and modify the rooms in that house and do a few other things with it to make sure it's adapted to those different flood events. Because we want to know the different scenarios that have occurred. The other thing I talked to Eric about was culverts. I mean, a lot of these models, most all the models, typically assume they're just free flowing. And we can't do that. So what we have to do is not select on 5 different options. Is the culvert partially full? Is it halfway full? We have to find something that's going to provide us a conservative, that's a worst case estimate, so there's nobody left surprised. So all of that information, sir, we have to go through and take a look at the runoff, take a look at the backwater effects. And I heard a little bit of that, during the last meeting the Corps was speaking at. That's going to be really interesting in us to make sure we can get those models working in that regard.
I mean, I think the model idea is good, but I think we need to know where we're getting the flood from.
Absolutely.
You can't pass on down the creek, and it's going to keep funneling more water from that highway no matter what we do.
Yeah.
It's going to have twice as much because it's got that whole hill to drain into that, and the more,
But that's what the
things
model will
out
take
there.
into account.
That's what the model does. It looks at all the different points like that it takes into a watershed model first.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So those are things.
The more hard surfaces we have out there, the more flooding we're gonna have.
Well, David, but we also have to remember too, I mean, we had major flooding in the eighties in that same area.
Oh, it's
And it
always
was over
flooded.
71 at that point, and there was nothing developed out there.
But I
So
think the
there's-
last time we had the big rains, the last 2 times, I had water problems myself. But this last one I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I didn't think it was gonna get up in there, but when I drove down there, I was totally surprised that it had,
Yeah.
it looked like to me it was more than it had the last 2 times. We had an
Yeah.
8-inch rain and a
Yeah.
7-inch rain.
That's a good point as well, is that we're not gonna just go back to the 2019-17 events, we're gonna go back further
Yeah,
than
it's
that.
gotta go
Yeah.
back
We
a
have
long
to.
ways.
We gotta get a diversity of how water is falling on the basin, how it responds, how it backs up. You can't just put some basic parameters on there, that's back of an envelope deal, and we won't do it. We have to have hard data. Yes, sir.
How many precipitation gauges are you talking for like each basin, Muddy Creek?
Well, right now, we're looking at a couple of them, but, you know, that's the thing, when we start looking at, you know, precipitation gauges that have integrity to them, that are gonna be, have, other lines of defense, so they're gonna be up and operational, then, you know, there's a cost prohibitive aspect to that as well.
And
So what we
did-
have to do is try to find the sweet spot as to what we think is gonna be best for us, you know.
Can you tie in the Doppler
Yeah,
radar from
yeah,
the
that's
weather
what I was
service?
talking about with all the, you know, when I talked about,
Okay.
we see the gut, you know, all that color
Right.
coming at us, we're gonna be
So
looking at that.
it goes
too.
into your model as well?
Yes, we
Good.
have. Yes, sir.
This isn't really a question for you, more for the council. What about, what kind of a warning system that you're gonna provide a neighborhood that this is coming?
The system that Paul was talking about would be an individual warning system that anybody in the public can sign up for.
Correct.
Oh,
You
right,
could
but I
adopt.
mean, is there gonna be a warning system for a neighborhood to say, hey, this is coming?
This
And
would
it
be
depends
your
what it is.
neighborhood
This would be
warning.
that, this would be that warning system, and you can,
So they have to have a cell phone that they can get this warning system on?
you'd have to have some way of, getting that message. There's not a different type of weather siren like we have for
A tornado?
a tornado or
Right.
something like that.
Okay, I got
This
it.
is, we're not contemplating something like that. This is
Okay.
a more individualized, and can be individualized by location. You can set it up that way. Typically, you choose your home address for that,
Okay, I
Whatever
didn't
you
know.
wish to enter, yeah.
yeah.
I wanted to
But
make, oh,
I
sorry.
guess, to me, the most important thing is, when you get that thing started, you're gonna be building up specific, not only do you have all the information that the Corps and the survey have collected throughout their history and across the country, you're gonna be getting specific to this watershed, or to both of the watersheds, information about how a particular rainfall impacts and how it behaves in this one location here. And the more we build up that information, the better then those alerts are going to be to let us know that, if you get an inch of rain in an hour, nobody's much worried. If you get an inch of rain in 10 minutes, that's a whole different thing. That's gonna trigger something, when you start having those heavier rains or faster rains, or on the other hand, if you get just a long duration rain that just keeps building and building and building, that's gonna be able to, we're gonna be developing that information that is specific to those areas, and gonna be able to give notice to how we do that. The type of warning that goes out, I think that's kind of the tail end of the thing. I mean, that's the goal, is to have a warning system, but the way that warning is delivered is at the end of the process of figuring out how we get the information that is we're gonna correlate on the ground to what really happens, to how the stream actually
Well, yeah, I
flows, how the
understand.
water actually backs up,
Yeah.
and in what circumstances that'll happen.
Well, and
The
I didn't
choice of-
understand that this was something that every individual in the United States can get access to. I thought it was gonna be something that the city of Harrisonville was gonna be warned, this is an immediate threat, and then you were gonna warn from there. I didn't know how this worked.
Everybody's got access to it,
Yeah.
it's public facing.
Okay.
Hey, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Just, Chris, like, later on down the road, kind of go back to what he was saying, like, let's say
wanted to install a early warning sign for flash flooding. Would your model and would we be able to hook to that to, in these certain circumstances, sound the alarm?
Yeah,
I mean, in a neighborhood that people that don't have smartphones or cell phones would have a warning system?
I think so, because what we're looking at is we're trying to tie in how reach of river, let's make something up here, let's say 10 miles, I don't know what Muddy Creek, what's the area we want to really look at here, let's say 10 miles. Well, within that 10-mile stretch, maybe there's a low water crossing or two, or a sign that needs to go up, or something that happens there. We have all these scenarios that we are modeling preemptively, right, we're doing it before. Such that when the rain hits and the accumulation comes in there and water alerts are sending us stuff, we know exactly what those layers are. So really what we're doing is just developing a whole series of inundation layers, right? But each one of them is connected to a certain output of that rainfall. So in terms of saying at what point do we need to put traffic barricades out or high water signs or things of that nature, absolutely. That's where you're going to pick one of those layers, you're going to draw it right back, well that's going to be rainfall that's going to be this duration, this accumulation, or it could be this duration and this accumulation, right? Because there could be several of them.
Right.
And so you correlate that, and then you have water alerts send you a text message so somebody knows, well, we got to start getting some signs out.
It's not, and to your point, it's not just the individual citizens or property owners that be able to access this. I'm sure the different emergency management agencies and the public works agencies and such would have those things too. For instance, we have currently, there's the crossing on Commercial Street that goes under the railroad. There is a probably close to 20-year-old high water warning system there that sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. We've talked about on the staff level of if we have a warning, we could dial in, we could have that alert us, and then we've talked about just having gates that we can put across there. So when it gets to a certain trigger point, before the water's coming up, but we know it's coming, we're just rolling those gates across the road and blocking it off. We're not to worry, not to worry about, did someone see the light, did the light work or something like that. We've got that warning, and it's alerted us to, in this case, a public works or emergency services would be physically closing that access, or putting up signs in a neighborhood, or whatever the proper response would be. So it's not just for a property owner to lift things off the floor, but for all the different people that are going to be impacted by that and could have the advantage of having an extra hour or whatever amount of time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, as I was talking about, just be able to hook up a warning system to that model or whatever, that when they got a certain height, that it would just sound the alarm, and all the homeowners would know that, hey, flood's coming, I need to prepare, I need to get my stuff up.
Yes, sir.
Especially at night.
Yeah, I mean, at nighttime, because it's dark, you're in the basement, whatever, you can't see.
Absolutely. So the possibility of that is there. Going from I don't have my cell phone, but going from, okay, this is the expected thing, to an automation to trick the wires or whatever it is, or it's just getting people out there, boots on the ground, that's no problem. But if it's automated to go somewhere else, that might be another something.
I mean, similar to the tornado siren, but I mean, just a flash flood warning, like a high-low or a whoop or something different, that means flash flood.
Right.
I mean, to trigger that alarm, like when it's 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, they're dead asleep, they're not checking their phone.
Right.
I mean, some are, but others are trying to sleep.
And then the text messages that come in. They could.
What about the ones that don't have a smartphone or a phone?
So code red
Even
is
my
some.
mom's flip phone has text messaging. There's gotta be a way.
Sure.
Well, and
There's people that's
unfortunately, the last one where the water came so fast, I mean, you guys didn't, there couldn't have been an hour's notice.
6 minutes?
I mean, it just,
We had
even if this had been
And we
in
still
place at
lost
that
that
point,
much.
I don't think it
Right.
would have
And we
helped
still
at
lost
that point.
Well, right, but I mean, even the 6 minutes, I mean,
Yeah.
once the water hits a certain height, sound the alarm, they at least know, hey, it's coming, and they
Or
can
at
get
least they
out.
would be able to warn,
You know, I mean,
especially
it's-
like city officials, and they would be able to get out, and like you
Yeah.
said, on ground, go door to door a little bit earlier than what maybe
Sure.
they would normally.
I want to make a distinction here if I can. We're not gauging rivers coming up. It's too late.
Yeah.
6
Yeah.
minutes,
Right.
not happening. We're looking at rainfall, we're looking at storms that are coming, when that rain hits, and looking at Doppler and combining that into a system that gives us some warning. So we wouldn't put this out there if there wasn't enough time. We wouldn't even do it, say forget about it.
I just have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
So obviously this all comes down to cost. So when you have a town like ours, it's a small town, is there like grants or like federal aid or anything that
Sure.
helps?
No, it's a great question. So two things, kind of fundamentally, our agency comes with some appropriations that we put into it. And it all depends upon, if it's straight data collection, I can't get into that piggy bank as much. If we're doing something that involves modeling, even if it's just using somebody else's model, I can reach in there and grab some money. And so we have our own appropriations, and then outside of that, there are grants out there. I've talked to Ted about it a little bit, I may have mentioned it to Eric as well, and some of you all may know what those are. I mean, we could talk about that. You know, there's FEMA grants, and they're usually after disaster declared counties, and I don't know if Cass fell under that, one of those. EDA grants, Economic Development Administration, we have HUD grants, maybe you've all done CDBG, I don't know. But there are those grants that are out there. But in terms of what we're doing, we provide appropriations, we don't cover everything. And we really are still in the scoping process right now. We put something out to the city to have them look at it, but it's a first draft. It's a cut to try to figure out where do we want to go with this thing.
And is all that information on your website that you were just talking about?
No, sorry. The grants, really, I shouldn't even, I know a little bit about it just through my experience, but I can certainly send some information to you all or Piner or somebody and show you where grants are, but I think as long as the city probably knows.
Is it feasible for a city our size, I mean, your guys' system, to realistically do something like this?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. I mean, we haven't really come to the final, if you're talking about cost,
Yeah.
I haven't really come to the final bottom line on it yet, to be quite honest with you. But, you know, I think so. We have a community of DeSoto. And one last thing is that I would probably say that the citizens group of, they call themselves Citizens for Flood Relief.
Yeah.
It's a 501c3.
Yeah.
And they're a group that has formed for the city of DeSoto. And if for no other reason, I think it might be a good idea for some people from this community to talk with some folks from that citizens group. I mean, they may say, oh, the USG is no good. I don't really care, but I think it's really important that there's some lessons learned. And they're in the middle of looking at grants, and they're in the middle of obviously dealing with all this FEMA stuff. In other words, we'd like their flood maps revised, because they got a lot of extended 1% base floods that are out there they didn't have years ago, that people are now having to go ahead and succumb to flood insurance. They're a really good group, only because I just know of them and have dealt with them a little bit, but they're just so in the weeds with this. So Citizens for Flood Relief out of the city of DeSoto, probably a good resource.
Excellent. Any questions or comments from the board members for Paul before we let him sit down? Anyone?
I like the information.
Great.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
All right, that's the end of our agenda items. We will move to Alderman and committee reports. I'll start with Alderman Dorhoff. Alderman Milner. Alderman Reed.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows that the dog park committee is in full gear. We have another meeting coming in this week. And we're in the fundraising portion, which is always the one that everybody tries to duck out of. But this dog park that the citizens are designing for the citizens of Harrisonville and for visitors that come through, I might add, is really important. And we're working very hard to raise that money without the help of the city budget, because we know where that money's going. So just keep us in mind and know that it's occurring. And if you have any ideas that you want to talk about, give me a call. Thanks.
You want to go ahead and talk about the town hall meeting since Mr. Deal is your guest presenter?
Absolutely. Town hall meeting is coming up the first.
It'll be November 2nd,
November
which is the
2nd.
first Saturday in November.
And Chris Deal, Park fellow back there, is going to give the program, and we're real excited about that because he will give you some details. And the meeting itself, other than the program, gives you a chance to ask questions about what's going on in Harrisonville and that kind of thing. And we'd really, really like to have lots of people there. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Miller.
I have a somewhat lengthy report from the October 8th Park Department meeting. And I'm wondering if something like this could possibly help to some extent on Walker Street and Trade Fair. City Park is undergoing the beginnings of a native prairie grass project. Some of you may have noticed along North Lexington and Ash Street, there's an area there by the creek that's turned brown rather quickly. We've done that intentionally. This is the beginning of a prairie grass species spring construction of rain garden planted with Missouri plants. This will provide essential habitats for butterfly, pollination, native bird species, and will benefit water quality and provide beauty for the community in years to come. The reason I think this might help possibly on the south end of town, prairie plants are part of the nature's original stormwater managers. It means these plants have an exceptionally long and complex root system, creates a sponge-like soil, soaks up rainfall, keeping it where it falls instead of rushing off in the nearest tributaries to contribute to erosion, downstream flooding. The plants will slow the runoff, facilitating absorption and filtering out many of the pollutants that come along with the floods. Included in this project are plantings of native Missouri shrubs along the streams to reduce their erosion. Unfortunately, the establishment and the visibility of all these plants take about a 3-year process from the newly sown prairie plants before you really see the real benefit from it. This project is being done in partnership with the South Grand River Watershed Alliance in conjunction with Harrisonville Park and Rec and the Harrisonville Rotary Club, with grant funding awarded through SGRWA through Missouri Department of Conservative Urban Conservation Grant. So might be something to look at between Walker Street and the creek to the south of them. That might be something that would at least help them to some extent. The plants are being provided, and the South Grand River Watershed Alliance will be providing assistance to the staff to get this area going at the park. Chris, is there anything else to add to that?
No, I think you're covering it very well. It's project's underway, and we're going to continue to work on it. So,
to echo what was brought up a moment ago about the dog park, there was a booth at the Log Cabin Festival, and they made about $200. And the last I knew, we've raised about $6,500 on our way to $75,000, so we're almost 10% of that goal. Membership at the community center is still over 4,200, which is wonderful. We concluded the weed removal from the park's lake system out at City Park. Next year, we will be starting a maintenance program that we're going to do every year for the next few years. And last but not least, probably the most important thing I can bring up for Chris is this Saturday night, October 26th, is the haunted hay rides in the Harrisonville City Park. He is looking for volunteers. Anybody and everybody. He wants help. So if you could help, please contact Chris or be there by what time?
5 o'clock, we'll have training at Shelter 2.
There you go. So if you can help this Saturday, please be at the City Park by 5 p.m. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Alderman Dickerson.
I was contacted today by Mr. Kidd. He has sent us emails out, and we've all received them. And he's complaining about some problems he's had with tree cutting in front of his mom's house. This is really not about him, it's about his mother. She is homebound, and so I drove by and I looked at it, and down the fence row, they just left big logs laying everywhere, and they're out. He can't mow it. Even, I know he's not mowing that section, and he says that's because of some agreement he had with you, Eric. I don't know. We'll talk about that later. But anyway, his mother needs some help on trying to get that picked up. And I'll be honest with you, that tree trimming crew did a horrible job of trimming those trees. I mean, they look terrible. And but they left some good-sized logs there, and Marcy suggested maybe somebody could use them to burn. I don't know but he
Anything
would
that
like to
they've
have
cut
those
down,
picked
they are
up by
responsible
whoever
for
did
cleaning
that.
up.
Huh?
Anything that they have cut down, they are responsible for picking up.
Who is, Gary?
No.
Oh, well, I seen them, there's a bunch. I mean, it's not a big bunch, but it's enough to make a problem to maintain the property. And then the other thing I want to say is that I guess you've all seen on TV at least about Mr. Reeder, Mr. Wayne Reeder and his problems in Kansas City and how he has soaked that city for $2 million in tax abatements and other problems. And I would just like to say this, when he was in this town trying to do his project, it was very, very painful on this board to go through it. Mayor Hassick stood up for what he believed it was right to do with Mr. Reeder and did do his research and figured him out. And I myself, and I think the citizens should appreciate the fact that he did that, because we dodged a big bullet by not having him involved in our town. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Alderman Davidson?
Yes, I have been recently made aware of some concerns from citizens regarding the lack of involvement and attendance by Ward 1 Alderman Brad Balkman. He's not here again tonight. From just counting, I think he's not been here 7 or 8 times since I became on the board. I think this is his 4th time in a row. So I'm wondering, should something we should address that?
There is a requirement in our code that if an alderman misses more than 6 meetings within 1 calendar year or 4 in a row, then under it's 110170A9, that if a motion is made by an alderman, then the mayor is to appoint a committee of 3 aldermen to investigate that infraction and then decide and recommend both findings and potential discipline of the alderman under our code. And so if you want to do something about, the appropriate thing would be to make a motion requesting that a committee be appointed by the mayor to investigate the alleged offense.
And what were the totals again, as far as, just to make sure that
The requirement is that failure to attend 4 consecutive regular board meetings or 6 regular meetings within a 12-month period. So based on what you told us tonight, it would be both, 4 in a row and more than 6, or six or more. So if you want to do something, the answer would be you need to make a motion that a committee be appointed by the mayor to investigate those absences.
And I would move forward with that.
So I have a motion that an investigative committee be appointed. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
I have a second by Alderman Milner. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Me?
Okay, may I have a show of hands, please? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed, 2. Thank you. That motion passes. Okay, so making that committee appointment, how many members are on that committee?
There's 3, you're supposed to appoint a committee of 3,
Okay.
of 3 aldermen.
Okay. Then Alderman Davidson, I would appoint you as one member of that committee. Alderman Milner as Mayor Pro Tem, I would appoint you as the 2nd member of that committee. And Alderman Turner, I'll appoint you as the 3rd member of that committee. And I believe we need to have a roll call vote approving those 3 committee members. So, Mr. Clerk?
Alderman Durock. Aye. Alderman Milner.
Aye.
Alderman Reese.
Aye.
Alderman Turner.
Aye.
Alderman Davidson.
Aye.
Alderman Dickerson.
Nay.
Alderman Miller.
Aye.
And Alderman Bachman is absent.
He wouldn't get to vote anyway, so
Okay.
code doesn't allow that, but thank you,
As I
Randy.
said.
Just for my point then, the next thing that would have to happen if the committee is so inclined is you need to appoint a chairman. And I've gone through this before, and it just makes it easier for me to help somebody if you can go ahead and do that now.
I'll
So-
make a motion that Alderman Davidson be that person.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
So I have a motion to elect Alderman Davidson as chair I need another vote from one of the other two committee members.
Second that.
Okay. Congratulations, Alderman Davidson. You're the chairman of that committee. So the process is this committee will conduct an investigation of the allegation of absences and bring back a report to the full board. Any other comments, Counselor?
Nope, and if I could talk to Alderman Davidson after the meeting, I can give you a couple of ideas where to go next.
Alderman Turner, we're still back to committee and Alderman reports.
Okay. The last planning and zoning, we had the public hearing on the rezoning of the Renner Place, and we had the preliminary plot and the final plot of it. Area over behind the Win Nelson and stuff for some future business. Then we also had the preliminary and final plat of the Harrisonville Town Center for the new Dollar General. It's gonna be right across from Sherwood Bank. So that'll be going in soon. And then also, this Saturday, Harrisonville's, the Royal Regiment's gonna be holding the first marching invitational this Saturday at 1 o'clock. We're gonna have 10 bands from the state coming over to compete, and so that'll be interesting. I would say avoid Eastwood. Parking around the junior high and
Don't get out of your house.
It's gonna be busy, and there's gonna be a lot of cars, so hopefully everyone will have good weather and good event for it.
Matt, will there be an admittance fee for that?
Yeah, it's $8
Okay.
for adults, and it starts at 1.
And there's food and everything in it?
Yeah,
So it can be a...
yeah, the Royal Regiment's having a funnel cake booth, concessions will be open, and, I mean, it's an all-day, the band's not at 1, but the band's will be getting there probably by 10 o'clock at least, if not sooner, to get ready.
It's something to watch.
It
that's
is,
for
I
sure.
mean, we're gonna be trying to park buses everywhere.
Mayor. Chief, if you could, tell us what streets, because there's gonna be some streets that are blocked, is that not correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Any parking, school-owned parking around the middle school or football field, the practice football fields will all be blocked for the entrance buses and vehicles hauling equipment. Finney Street is blocked, and I believe part of Edgevale is parked in front of the high school, or Highland in front of the high school, or in front of the middle school is blocked.
I thought Eastwood's blocked from Mechanic down to,
From Mechanic to South Street?
yeah, or no.
That's where the buses are coming up, so I don't think it is.
No, from south to the entrance. I mean, all the buses.
It's been several months since.
Yeah, there's.
No, the
Parts of
buses,
Eastwood.
the buses will enter off of South Street and come up Eastwood, so that will not be blocked, but it will be
Right.
full of buses trying to get in, so,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
So you're both correct.
We have to. That's it.
Thank you. Report from the city administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. As we've talked about earlier this evening, the staff's been busy working on our budget for next year. We've been involved with the meetings on the storm drainage projects that we have with the Corps and with the survey. We've had a good response. We had advertised for the vacancy in the city administrator position. That advertisement closed the end of last week, and we have a couple of dozen applications to go through, along with some more applications that there are people that apply for jobs that I think just are applying for jobs, but we have a number of qualified applicants that we'll be looking at. And those will, first of all, go through a kind of a screening process, and we'll make sure that the different applicants have met the minimum qualifications that the board has set out, and so kind of get that information compiled for the board so they can start their considerations of that. One other thing that we have that I want to call people's attention to is that we had an error in the calculation of our electrical supply cost adjustment. People call it the power supply or power cost adjustment. That is a part of your electrical utility bill that goes up and down depending on what the actual cost of the power is that we have to buy wholesale, that supplies all of our businesses and residents in the community. And we've discovered an error in the calculation formula that we've been overcharging some people, or all of our customers, for this year, but it really became, in the last 2 months was the biggest problem with it. And so the bill that's going out right now, that's in the process of being printed and distributed, has a good sized credit on that, and will also be crediting in the next couple of months. And the reason we're spreading it out is we first of all wanted to as soon as we could, start sending that out, but we have to figure out what the total amount is, so the fine tuning of that credit will be in the, toward the end of that. The purpose of the supply cost adjustment is to make sure that if the cost of energy is higher than what is anticipated in the rates, that we're collecting enough money to pay for it. If it's lower than what was anticipated in the rates, that people aren't paying that extra amount, that we're only collecting the amount, that portion of it that's related to energy cost is just for the cost that we actually have to pay at the pump, if you will. It's gonna vary month to month, season to season, and so that's why that is a variable cost. And our commitment in making these credits is to make sure that everybody's made whole again. We apologize for the mistake, and we're gonna get that money back into people's pockets. So you'll be seeing a credit on this bill as well as the next couple of bills until we get all of that returned to the ratepayers.
You're talking about the bill we just received today?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how your mail works, but okay.
Okay.
I have $25.
Oh, I didn't look at it. I just saw the bill.
A question on that. What about the people who no longer live here that have been overcharged?
We don't have a mechanism to adjust that rate.
So how are you going to approach that? You've overcharged them.
Yeah, just as if we had undercharged it,
I thought you said overcharged.
I did. I said just as if we had undercharged and we make it up, later on. We have no mechanism to go back to people that are not current customers. That's not in our billing system.
Maybe you should come up with a mechanism for that.
There is no way to do that, sir. And quite honestly, if you want to ask questions later after the meeting, we can, but we don't allow comments and questions during this portion of the meeting. So thank you.
You have the September 2019 Municipal Court Report in your packet. Questions from the media?
Yeah, I have a couple. Okay, so this committee that was formed concerning Alderman Bockelman, when do they have to report? Is there a time limit?
There is not. The statute, our code just requires that they conduct an investigation, including contacting the alderman at issue and investigating that. But it also, the code says the investigation is to be done discreetly.
So are you placing a deadline on it, Mayor?
No, sir.
Okay. And then my other one will be then on the electrical overcharges. How much was overcharged? How much was the overcharge?
It works out to the total of all the overcharges is about 12. It's a little over 12 cents per kilowatt hour.
For how many months?
Well, it started at the very beginning of the year, but it didn't really, the biggest impacts were just in the last 2 months prior to this month, so in August and September's bills.
Okay,
So that's where the bulk of the error.
So what kind of refunds should people be looking at? And again, I know you hate the term average consumer, but what's the average consumer gonna get back?
Well, this month, I think we have 3.1 cents plus whatever the
New multipliers.
whatever the the actual this month's credit would be plus 3.1 cents per kilowatt hour. So 3.1 cents is the amount of the refund this month on top of the normal credit or charge that they would have.
Okay,
And
so
so-
what do we charge for a kilowatt hour, basically? I'm trying to get, is this a real small percentage, or is this 10%, or how much is this?
Well, 3.4 or 3.1 cents would be probably about a third of the energy cost. And it depends on an individual's consumption and what the cost of overall what the cost. But the last 2 months was a larger amount of error. And that's when it really became obvious that something wasn't tracking right.
But you don't know where the error came from?
But there was an error in calculating that formula, yeah. But I said that, and that's what I'm telling you.
Well, you're really not answering the question, is where was the error made?
The error was made in calculating that formula. And that's all we're saying. I mean, it doesn't really serve any public purpose to go into pointing fingers as to one person or one group or one process.
So was it a person or a group or a process?
Yes, it was.
That's not an answer.
Any further questions from the media?
I'm not going to give an answer, so.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments I want to make to the audience and to the board and to the staff. I'd like to, first of all, pick up on Alderman Miller's comment about native plants and their ability to absorb water. I think that's a great suggestion because native plants, things that were out on prairies before land was ever developed, native plants and grasses and prairie grasses have very, very deep, deep roots, and they are very good at absorbing water. And it might be worthwhile, I know you guys like to do a whole lot of research on this. This might be really helpful to do some research into prairie grasses. You can go online and look up Missouri Prairie Foundation. They are the group that preserves prairies all over the state of Missouri. We actually have one of those prairies here in Harrisonville. It's Snowball Hill Prairie, right off of Brick Plant Road. And their website is full of information about native grasses, and it might just be really helpful to research and see about getting some of those planted out there in your neighborhood. Secondly, I want to just address the fact that we have the cooperation now of a lot of different agencies to help us address this issue with what's been going on in your neighborhood and in the trade fair in the south part of town. I am very pleased that we do have federal agencies and state agencies now around the table to help us address this problem. It's a huge problem, it's a very expensive problem, and I know you want answers right away, and we don't have answers right away. But we're addressing the things that we can right now in the short term, and then we're talking about things to do in the long term. The short term includes things like cleaning out the culverts, which MoDOT did. We're also talking to MoDOT about installing some riprap, some rock in those areas that are eroding. Long term, we're talking about increasing the size of the culvert, adding an additional box to be able to handle that water. Those things don't happen overnight. And as Alderman Milner said, flooding has been going on in that area for years. But I'm just going to ask you to be patient and work with us as we work through some of these issues. We've held 2 meetings now, conference calls, with both Representative Hafner and Representative Fauch, and with Senator Emery on the state side, with MoDOT on the state side, with our staff, our public works director, our city engineer, our street superintendent, people that have been in the neighborhoods as we have. We had Alderman Turner and Alderman Davidson on those calls, people that have been down in the neighborhoods, and we know what you've been through. We never want to minimize what you've been through. You've heard a lot of people say this one wasn't as bad as it was in 2017, and that may be true, but still people in that neighborhood lost things. You lost your belongings, you lost some things that meant a lot, and you lost some revenue. But I just want you to know that we are working through it. It's not going to come as quickly as I know that you want it to, but I want you to understand that we are working together with other agencies that can help us. U.S. Army Corps, the USGS. We've got the attention of a lot of people that we've been able to bring to the table, and quite frankly, this should have been done a long time ago. But I think we're closer now than we've ever been before. And so I just want us to keep moving forward and being able to address the issue. You know, we've got right-of-way issues, we've got, you know, who has responsibility, who owns the property. Those are all things that have to be identified, and those are the people that need to come around the table. So I just say that just to kind of give you an update. Tammy, I wanted you to know, and I'll still meet with you personally. If you want to talk to me personally, I'm happy to do that. But I just wanted you to know where we're at and what we've been doing. And I commend our staff and our aldermen for being there and being involved and caring about what's going on down there in that part of the city. So I appreciate you all. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion from Alderman Dickerson, a second from Alderman Turner, that we adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Good night.